In this video, I will show you how to query the GraphQL interface that is exposed by your subgraph. I'm going to use Apollo both for the React GraphQL client and also as a CLI to generate TypeScript types and stuff like that. So if we go to the docs, go to Apollo CLI. I already have Apollo as a dependency, so it should be installed in your project. If you scroll down, we have this command section, and the first command we're going to use is this one, client download schema, and it will download the schema from our GraphQL endpoint. We need it in order to generate TypeScript interfaces. So if you go back to your subgraph here, you can see this temporary query URL, and it's rate limited and it's for dev environments. So for production, you must publish your subgraph and you will have to pay to use it. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use this temporary URL. So let's copy this command. Go to your project, open the terminal, and run npx apollo. Pass in the command name, and we are going to specify an endpoint. So dash dash endpoint, and then copy the temporary URL, and then specify the name of the output file. In this case, it's schema.graphql. Now that the schema is downloaded, we're ready to start writing GraphQL queries. We're gonna use the playground here to help us. So this is how a GraphQL query looks like, if you don't already know. So the graph provides us with a lot of arguments we can use. Um, for example, we have the where argument, and we can use this to filter the NFTs. For example, we can only fetch the NFT with the ID 1. We can filter by any of the NFT fields. We can also filter with this one. Um, so we can do 2 and like this, we're only gonna fetch NFTs where the 2 field equals this. So the first query that we're gonna write is a query that fetches NFTs that are owned by a certain address. And we know that the 2 field represents the address to which the NFT was transferred to. So this is 2 is always the owner of the NFT. So we can just copy this query and use it in our front end. We're gonna, of course, change this to be the address of the current user, and we will also need the price here. Go to stage NFT market and create a new file. We're gonna call it use owned NFTs.ts, and let's write the GraphQL query. So we're gonna call it get owned NFTs, and we're gonna use the GraphQL template here from Apollo client. And to define a query, we use the keyword query and followed by the query name. Let's call it get owned NFTs. And the query is going to take an argument, and argument names always start with the $sign. Let's call it owner, and it's going to be of type string non-nullable. And then we're going to pass in this query we have here. And instead of this hard-coded address, we're going to use the owner from the parameters. So let's go back to the docs here, and we're going to use this command, client codegen, to generate TypeScript interfaces. So let's see how this command works. npx apollo client cogent dash dash help. So the flags we need to provide here are the target flag, which will be TypeScript, and the local schema file, which will point to the schema that we just downloaded. So let's run npx apollo client cogent. So local schema file is gonna be schema.graphql, and the target is gonna be TypeScript. So we can see that two folders were generated. This is the global types, which is kind of empty now, and we have this get owned NFTs file with all the TypeScript interfaces we are going to need. Now go back to use owned NFTs file, and we're gonna write a hook that will fetch the NFTs owned by the current user. So const use owned NFTs, and we are going to use Apollo clients use query hook here. So const data equals use query. So use query takes a query, which is get owned NFTs in this case, and it also takes variables like this as an object. And for now, this doesn't have any types. So let's add the types to this use query. So we're gonna use the get owned NFTs and the get owned NFTs variables. And as you can see here, it's typed now, and it says that the owner is missing. So we should add the owner, which will be of type string, as you can see. The owner is going to be the address of the current user. So let's grab the address of the current user here. Use signer address. It's complaining because the address cannot be undefined here. So we can just bypass this uh, using this notation here. We want this query to be disabled if the address is undefined, so we can add the skip parameter here. So skip if address equals undefined, or simply not address. This hook also returns error and load-in. So if you want to display loaded states, error states, this is where you can get them. I'm not gonna do this just for sake of simplicity. And I'm gonna get the owned NFTs from the data. So const owned NFTs equals data dot NFTs, which will be an array of get owned NFTs underscore NFTs, which is this interface here. So we'll have objects that have ID from Tutuk Neurai and price. And here we can return owned NFTs. And finally, let's export this hook. Use own export default, use owned NFTs. Now, in order for Apollo queries to work, we have to provide Apollo client to the components. So let's go to pages underscore app.tsx, and just as we provided the signer, we should provide an Apollo client. So first, let's create a new client here. So const client equals new Apollo client. So it takes a cache object, and we can use the in-memory cache, and it takes a URL or URI, and this will be the GraphQL URI of our subgraph. So go back to your subgraph, copy the URL. We can just pass it here directly, but let's add it to the environment file. So next public GraphQL or graph URL. Pass in the URL, and here let's grab the URL. So graph URL equals process.env dot graph or next public graph URL as string, and let's use it here. Now let's add an Apollo provider here, and it takes a client, which will be this client we created. So before using the new use owned NFTs hook, I don't really want to use it directly because I think this should be part of the use NFT market. Just because I want all the functionality that has to do with NFTs to be encapsulated in one single hook. So let's go here and do const owned NFTs equals use owned NFTs and return it here. Now go to pages, owned, and let's go to the owned page here. This is where the owned NFTs will appear. So restart your dev server and go visit localhost again. Go to the /owned page, and instead of showing owned here, we want to show the list of owned NFTs. So let's do const owned NFTs equals use NFT market. And for now, let's just console.log owned and see if we get anything. So owned was undefined, but after it was fetched, we have an array of NFTs, as you can see here. So let's go ahead and display these NFTs here. So we can do owned NFTs dot map. So for each NFT, we're going to display an NFT card. It takes an NFT as in the arguments. And the NFT object that the NFT card expects is different from the one returned by the hook. So let's go ahead and fix that. So the NFT that this component expects comes from this interfaces file. So here's the expected type. It has an ID, owner, price, and token URI, as opposed to these fields here. So go back to use owned NFTs hook, and instead of returning these raw NFTs, let's parse them and let's transform them to our NFT type here. So let's write a function, call it parse row NFT. So it's going to be a function that takes row NFT. Let's use get owned NFTs underscore it NFT. So it's going to be of type get owned NFTs underscore NFTs, and it's going to return an NFT. So let's import NFT from interfaces. So we're going to return an object. The ID will be row.id. The owner. So the owner of the NFT is either going to be the row.to or the row.from. So if the NFT is for sale, we want the owner to be the original seller, because if the NFT is for sale, then the actual owner is the NFT market contract. So we don't want to display the NFT market contract address, we want to display the original sellers. And if the NFT is not for sale, then the owner will be the raw.to. And to tell if an NFT is for sale or not, we can check the price. So if the price equals 0, then the NFT is not for sale. And if the price does not equal 0, then the NFT is for sale. So we can do raw.price equals 0. If it is, then it's not for sale and the owner will be raw.to. Else it's going to be raw.from. The price will be raw.price, but it's going to be a huge number because the unit will be way. We want to parse it into ETH, so we can use ethers, imported from ethers, not Hardhat. So ethers.utils.format ether, and the last field is the token URI, which will be just raw.token URI. And here, instead of returning owned NFTs directly, we can do data.nfts.map, and let's pass the parse row NFT function. So these owned NFTs will be of type NFT instead of this row type. So go back to the owned page and you can see that the error disappeared. And now let's go back here. And as you can see, the NFTs are being displayed. Now there's one thing I need to fix here. So if we go to the NFT card component, there's this for sale boolean, and I consider an NFT to be for sale if the NFT.price does not equal the string 0. So as you can see here, the price is not the string 0, it's 0.0, and that's because here in the uh, parse function, uh, the string 0 is being parsed to ether and it results in the string 0.0. So I need to check if the raw.price equals 0. If it is, I'm not going to parse it, I'm just going to have 0 here directly. If it's different than 0, then I'm going to parse it. So if we go back, you see that the card is fixed here and the button says sell instead of showing the price. So let's make these cards sit next to each other. So go back to the owned page. So let's wrap this in another flex box. So div, and it's going to be a row. So flex, and we want to wrap the cards if there are too many in one line. So add flex wrap here. Let's go back and does this take class name? I hope so. Yep. So we can do margin right 2 to separate the cards. And I believe if we do this, the cards will wrap. So we maybe also need margin bottom 2. And it's scrollable, perfect. Before wrapping this video, I want to show you guys how to go from a token URI to displaying the token information like this. So we only had a URI, now we have an image, name and description. So let's go back to the owned NFTs page, and actually while we're at it, let's add a key prop here. And let's have the NFT.id as the key, so this error in the console disappears. Now let's again console log our NFTs. And as you can see here, the only information we have is IPFS token URI. So if you try to copy this and try to access it from the browser, it does not work. This is IPFS protocol, not HTTP. So we can't just simply make a GET request to this URI and get the data back. So what we need to do is to use an IPFS gateway. And there are many gateways. We can use IPFS.io. And to do that, we're going to replace this protocol segment here with IPFS.io slash IPFS and slash the URI. We went from IPFS to HTTP, and now we have a URL that we can just fetch using a GET request. And as you can see, the GET request here returned the metadata JSON that we uploaded. And it's the same thing for the image. The image is not HTTP. It's also IPFS. So to fetch that, we have to replace this with IPFS.io slash IPFS. And then we'll have our image. So this is exactly what I'm doing in the front end. So let's go to the NFT card. And as you can see, I have a use effect uh, that depends on the token URI here. And this is the code I execute to fetch the token metadata. So first, I fetch the metadata JSON. And as you can see, I'm using a helper function here. It's under the helpers folder. So IPFS to HTTPS just does the same thing I do in the URL here. I just replace this with IPFS.io. This is exactly what I do here. And then when I get the JSON, I set the name, the description, and the image. And as you can see, I also use IPFS to HTTPS on the image. And I save the metadata in the stage. And I use this metadata in the component here. So I have an image with the source metadata image URL. I have the description, the name. So yeah, this is how I go from this URL to displaying this component. I guess that's it for this video. In the next video, I will make this sell button work. For now, it crashes, but clicking this button should open a pop-up where you can enter the price of this NFT, and then when you click confirm, this NFT will be listed for sale with that price you just entered.